5 weeks into the war, the maps are alive with motion. Arrows curl and sweep like tides across Europe's frontiers. The first rush of optimism, of parades and flags, has already faded. In its place stands a harsher rhythm. Rail timetables, casualty lists, weary columns on the march. This is late August 1914, week 5 of a conflict that has already devoured the comfortable certainties of a continent. In the West, the German right wing, the engine of the Schlieffen Plan, has driven through Belgium and pressed into northern France. The forts at Liège have fallen, Namur has gone, and the charred ruins of Louvain's library still smoke in European memory. The British Expeditionary Force, bloodied at Mons and steeled at Le Cateau, withdraws through northern France in a disciplined, punishing retreat. The French Fifth Army, battered and resilient, falls back alongside them. In farm lanes fringed with dust, the heat of August hangs thick. Horses stumble, boots crack. The pace of the retreat is measured not only in miles, but in the effort it takes to keep going. In the east, Russia has surged forward with speed and mass. 2 armies have entered East Prussia. Their railways and supply lines strain. Their maps are incomplete, and their radios, unbelievably, speak in clear. German ears listen. German staffs calculate. And in that space between interception and decision, a plan emerges that will define the week and echo far beyond it. Southward, the dual monarchy fights for its life against Russia and Galicia and lunges again at Serbia across contested rivers and steep ground. The Austro-Hungarian armies, complicated in structure and uneven in quality, face hard lessons. The Russian steamroller, while not as smooth as it appears, has weight. The front buckles. A city called Lemberg will change hands before this week is through, and with it, the strategic heartbeat of a theater. At sea, gray swells carry the promise of ambush. The Royal Navy and the Kaiser's high seas fleet measure each other across the misty shallows of the German Bight. Submarines, those new knives of the deep, move with stealth, while light cruisers and destroyers prowl for advantage. A British plan to probe and sting will ignite a hard fight off a sandbanked coast dotted with red bowies and hidden shoals. At home, recruiting posters climb the walls. In Britain, a man with a formidable mustache points a finger from news kiosks and post offices. In France, the names of new formations are written in the margins of the provisional plans. In Germany, victory rhetoric mingles with anxiety, even as trainloads of men roll west, east, and then west again, redeployed, rethreaded, reassigned in search of decisive weight at the front. In every capital, a topographic map lies open on a desk, pinned by a ruler, edged with coffee stains, crowded with decisions. Their leaders are changing too. General Joseph Joffre, calm and composed, surveys the ebb of his line and removes those who cannot keep pace with events. In East Prussia, a new pairing has arrived to replace a commander unnerved by early setbacks. One, a retired general with a calm gaze and a stoic air. The other, already lauded for audacity at a fortress town on the Meuse, sharp of mind and quick of hand. Their names, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, will be stamped into the next pages. Yet in the middle of these grand currents, the war is felt in the human scale. Refugee carts pile high with bedding and pots. Children peer from under blankets, and the old sit quiet on wagon benches. Village churches toll as columns pass. Railway stations hum with trains on tight schedules, ammunition, biscuits, shells, uniforms, and men. The fifth week feels suspended, between rush and reckoning, between plans drawn and the tests that will erase or vindicate them. Across river crossings in northern France, artillery positions are chosen and then abandoned as the retreat ticks on. Staff cars whisk along crowded roads, their windshields dusty and streaked from hurried hands. Couriers ride at a gallop. In bustling Paris, the boulevards still carry the pulse of a great city, but new barbed wire and trenches in the green spaces whisper another story, a story of preparation and resolve. The city will not panic easily. It is ancient and used to sieges. Yet there is a tremor under the cobblestones now, a rumor of the front drawing close. Week 5 has begun. Its signature will be speed and surprise. checked by endurance and choice. On land and sea, opportunity gathers and breaks like surf, and within days, a victory in East Prussia, a British strike on the high sea, and a stubborn stand on a French river will combine to shape the great role of the war, toward Paris, toward a river named the Marne, and toward the long shadow that will cloak the months ahead. Dawn over the North Sea arrives as a slow lifting of gray. On August 28th, light little more than a smudge on the horizon, British destroyers and light cruisers steer toward the Heligoland Bight, the shallow, dangerous waters off Germany's North Sea coast. This is a scouting raid, a thrust designed to bait and sting, to test the reflexes of the Kaiser's navy within sight of its own red-sailed fishing boats and low islands. The plan weaves together several strands: submarines on station to report and menace, destroyer flotillas to pounce, light cruisers to support, and beyond the haze, heavy hitters ready to intrude if the opportunity ripens. British captains know the Bight's risks: tides, shoals, fog, and the proximity of German bases, but the calculus favors nerve. The German pickets must answer if provoked. In that answering lies a chance to isolate and strike. Contact comes fast, as it always does in confined waters. A German torpedo boat shows its wake, then more wakes, then splashes of shell fall in tight, stitched lines as guns find ranges. Smoke pours from funnels, orders crackle across bridges. The British ships thread through their own smoke and the thin coastal mist, silhouettes turning from gray to black as the sun climbs. It is a knife fight of swift maneuvers and quick decisions, where minutes matter. As the fight intensifies, more German light cruisers arrive to support their harried pickets. German officers expect, as doctrine dictates, that the high seas fleet's distant muscle stands close enough to back them. Yet the British have planned for this. Battle cruisers, long-legged and fast, wait beyond the mist line, ready to slash into the melee. Their great guns speak in sharp thunder, hurling shells that lift the sea itself into brief mountains of white water when they miss, and into towering plumes of smoke when they strike. A German cruiser reels under the blows, another burns, her superstructure a furnace. A third, gutted and listing, becomes a dying shape against the flat water. The fight is not clean. British ships take hits. A light cruiser staggers, her bridge smashed, her deck slick and shrapnel swept. Destroyers circle and dart, their tubes emptying, crews straining, sailors' hands blistered on hot brass. Below the surface, British submarines lie in wait, patient, predatory, while German torpedo tracks shimmer like glass knives. The battlefield seems to move under the participants as tides pull and smoke drifts, hiding and revealing the killers in turn. By midday, the balance is plain. The British have sprung a trap, and sprung it well. Several German light cruisers and a torpedo boat sink or are left sinking in oily water, their crews hauled away in small boats by enemies who were enemies only moments before. Casualties can be counted in hundreds here and dozens there. The numbers clinical, but the human toll immediate. A burned hand here, a stunned face there, a lifebelt bobbing in a gray swell. Strategically, the ripples spread. The Kaiser's navy takes its lesson and internalizes it. For a time to come, caution will be a companion in these waters. The risks of venturing far from the shelter of home will weigh heavier than the lure of quick ambushes of their own. For Britain, the raid brings a tonic of success at a moment when the news from the land is increasingly grim. Newspapers will seize the victory. The Admiralty will study the mistakes and the lucky strokes, sharpening the knife for future forays. There is also a psychological twist. The North Sea feels smaller after this day. Its sandbanks and channels no longer simply barriers to movement, but arenas where speed, coordination, and intelligence can shape outcomes quickly. Wireless intercepts and scouting reports will frame future operations. The notion that surprise belongs only to those who wait behind minefields and harbor booms begins to ebb. The Heligoland Bight raid does not decide the naval war. It does something else. It sets the tone. It tells the German fleet that the British can strike within sight of their own waters and depart with their battle flags intact. It tells the British public that, Whatever comes on land, the sea is contested on terms of British choosing, and it tells every sailor standing a gun or a helm that the new war is not only a matter of line-of-battle grandeur and distant blockades. It is also about the nimble, the daring, and the violent flashes that last an hour and change the arithmetic of confidence. When the smoke clears and the survivors are counted, the ships turn for home, wakes foaming behind them. The day drops toward evening across the flat water. On decks, sailors sit and stare at the sea, the taste of cordite still on the tongue. A raid, a victory, and a message sent, one that will hum in dispatches and rumor throughout the 5th weeks of the theaters, reminding the belligerents that this new war rewards those who move swiftly and see clearly, that truth will find its greatest demonstration not on water, but among lakes and forests far to the east. East Prussia is a land of lakes and sandy soil, of pine woods and winding roads that turn to dust in summer and mud in rain. In late August, 2 Russian armies press into this landscape from the east and southeast, while German mobilization lines, compact and efficient, feed defenders from within. The geography matters. So do the wires that carry voices through the air. Russian commanders talk too freely. Their signals, often sent in the clear, map their intentions against the sky for anyone equipped to listen. German ears listen. German staff officers sketch the paths those voices promise and compare them to the swarming reports of cavalry patrols and rail schedulers. In the presence of this information, timely, rich, and actionable, plans harden into decisions. The German 8th Army, initially shaken by early contact, has a new anchorage in command. Paul von Hindenburg, recalled from retirement, brings the imperturbable calm of a man who has seen plenty and knows how little is won by agitation. At his side, Erich Ludendorff, recently made a hero by his part in forcing the fall of a fortress to the west, supply speed and relentless attention to detail. Between them, an able deputy, Max Hoffmann, adds the intimate local knowledge and conceptual daring that turns good ideas into workable ones. These men, with their subordinates and their railways, will orchestrate what comes next. The Russian Second Army, under General Samsonov, moves in from the south and southeast. It is a big formation that is not as cohesive as its size implies. Its corps do not march in perfect step. Its flanks are loose. Its partner to the north, the First Army, under General Rennenkampf, stands separated by time, space, and the bruises of recent battles. Old grudges and imperfect coordination widen the gap. The Germans see a slit in the door and aim to force it open. To do this, they must move quickly and with precision. They shift corps by rail on tight timetables, turning interior lines into hard leverage. They order Hermann von Francois, an aggressive corps commander who trusts his heavy guns and his own judgment, to hold off on his initial eagerness when necessary, and to strike when it matters. They accept risk on one flank to buy time and advantage on the other. They watch the Russians advancing into a pocket that does not yet exist and intend to give that pocket shape. East Prussia's roads carry more than men in this week. They carry rumors. Farmers speak of Russian columns moving like river bands through the trees, of supply wagons stretching beyond sight, of mobs and disorder behind the lines. Refugees and stragglers become brushstrokes on a larger picture, adding urgent splashes of color that confirm the German staff's logic. The Russian Second Army is stretched and blind in places. Its commanders struggle to feel their way in a new land, and their units, hungry and tired, still march forward because that is what the plan demands. Operations begin as a flexible design. The Germans probe and feint, then commit. They fight sharp actions at crossings and in the sandy clearings where artillery can deploy. Francois complains when ordered to wait, then attacks with enthusiasm when given rein, his batteries clobbering Russian formations that stumble into range as if onto a stage already set. As they fight, the Germans are building. Each skirmish, each fixed line of guns, is a stitch in a closing seam. By midweek, the contours of the trap can be seen by those with the vantage to see them. The Russians have advanced far enough that their routes back are narrow and their lateral connections uncertain. German formations, hardened by training, guided by radio intelligence and fueled by close rail support, begin to reach for the shoulders of the Russian advance. An encirclement is a delicate thing. It can be lost by haste or won by patience. The German command juggles its impatience like a live coal, knowing that one premature thrust could let the prey slip away. The Russian commanders feel the change in the air. Orders become more urgent. Requests for support go unanswered or are answered too late. Messages pass between headquarters at tempo too slow for events. Some corps commanders, better than others, fight their men out of small pockets and avoid capture. Others, under sudden pressure, give ground, turn, and find the road behind them compromised. Samsonov himself rides among his men, trying to straighten lines that are already fraying. Meanwhile, down every German rail line, engines hiss and couplers clank. Staff officers check their watches against the schedules and nod. The spoke-like network brings units where they must be brought, a manifestation of the old promise of interior lines realized at last. In East Prussia, the technical and the tactical have found common purpose. The trap draws nearer to becoming a ring. The closing of an encirclement is rarely dramatic. It is more often a long sigh, a settling, a pressure that grows until there is no way out that does not involve heroism or disaster. In the sandy fields and pine woods of East Prussia, the pressure grows through the last days of August. What began as maneuvers will be recorded as a battle. What the Germans will name Tannenberg, invoking a medieval defeat they wish to avenge symbolically, reaches its climax. The Russian Second Army is in trouble in ways that are both visible and invisible. The visible trouble lies in the columns disordered under fire, the guns abandoned when teams are shot down, the supply wagons stopped and looted by soldiers too hungry to wait for rations. The invisible trouble lies in the map lines that no longer connect, in the orders that arrive after a position has been lost, in the messages that say we hold when, in fact, the holding is already relapsing into retreat. Francois, his guns booming, pins and then punishes Russian units at key points. German corps to the north and west join hands, one after another, like a chain being forged. Russian regiments that try to break out find themselves crossing fire-swept fields. Others wander into areas where the sand underfoot is crisscrossed by the tracks of German gun carriages and the deep ruts of field kitchens. The forest, indifferent, echoes to artillery and the cries of wounded men. General Samsonov, riding in a world that shrinks with every hour, seeks a route for his army to slip the net. The landscape does not oblige. Reports pile on reports, all are incomplete. Scouts cannot find open roads that remain open by the time their information reaches headquarters. The realization spreads, first a whisper, then a shout, that large parts of the army are surrounded. Some Russian units resist to the last cartridge, maintaining enough composure to withdraw in good order where withdrawal is still possible. Others fragment under the stress of hunger, exhaustion, and confusion. Captured men file past German guards in sullen lines, their faces gray, their uniforms torn and dusty. Officers surrender their swords. More than 90,000 will be counted as prisoners by week's end, a figure that will ricochet through capitals with the force of a blow. German casualties are not light, but the victory feels comprehensive. Batteries of captured guns stand mute, their blemished bronze and steel a testament to the scale of the disaster. Ammunition wagons, far from their depots, sit idle in sandy hollows. In pockets of woodland, small groups of Russians slip away, grimly determined to reach the lines of the First Army to the north. Some do. Many do not. Samsonov does not survive this week. Alone with a few companions, he walks into the night and does not return. His death is part of the legend that grows around Tannenberg, a legend that will serve many uses, propaganda, morale, and a grim kind of consolation for those who need victory to have faces and names. The German command will speak of the battle as retribution for a medieval defeat, choosing the name Tannenberg rather than a closer geographic label, crafting symbolism as carefully as they crafted the rail schedules that enabled the victory. In Berlin, the news brings relief and exhilaration. In Petrograd, the news is received with shock and denial, then with a tightening of the jaw. Russian capacity for replacement is real. Their manpower is a reservoir that is not quickly drained. But the blow here is not only to numbers. It is to prestige, to confidence, and to perceptions abroad of Russian competence. Allies will note the contradictions of the Eastern campaign in this same week. Victory here for Germany, but in Galicia, a very different story unfolding. And yet, even this triumph has its limits. The German Eighth Army's success does not unmake the larger strategic calculus. In the West, decisions of equal weight are underway, and the men required to turn Eastern success into a decisive shift in the wider war are not easily spared. News of the victory arrives in ears that must also absorb reports from France, continued retreat, resilience, and opportunities opening. Opportunities that can be lost by overconfidence as surely as by timidity. For now, Tannenberg stands like an obelisk in Week 5. It is a confirmation of the value of intelligence properly used, of interior lines properly exploited, and of command decisiveness properly applied. It is a cautionary lesson in the cost of poor communications and overlong advances. It is also a herald for more fighting in East Prussia, fighting that will continue around the lakes and through the woods in the days ahead. But the cameras of history shift west now, following the rumble of wagons and the quick steps of infantry on dusty French roads, where another balance is tilting toward a confrontation that will determine whether Paris is a prize taken or a fortress that holds. Part 5. The Great Retreat. In northern France, the roads are alive with motion, but the motion is backward, measured, and hard. The British Expeditionary Force, having fought a sharp defense at Mons and a bruising stand at Le Cateau, marches south in a retreat that is no rout. Worn boots slap the road, straps dig into shoulders, faces set into unreadable masks of endurance. Each day is a time-distance problem. How to keep pace with retreating allies, how to stay ahead of the pursuer, and how to fight when the line must stiffen. Rear-guard actions become the punctuation of the march. At Étreux, a battalion of Irish soldiers holds on in a sunken road and orchards, fighting until ammunition is gone, buying hours with courage in a place few have heard of. At Nary, as the new month breaks, a British artillery battery will fight its guns in a misty field at dawn against cavalry and guns that seem to have sprung from the fog itself. Stories like these become the threads of an identity, a sense among the soldiers that their small stands matter to the larger fabric of survival. The French Fifth Army, under pressure, withdraws alongside, its men sometimes stepping off roads to let British columns pass, sometimes relieving positions as dusk thickens. Civilian carts clog the lanes. Children stare at the columns with a mixture of awe and fear, while women stand by the roadside with cups of water and faces that ask questions their mouths do not. The pausing and moving strikes a rhythm that describes both urgency and composure. The retreat is controlled, but no retreat is gentle. Joffre's instructions for the withdrawal blend discipline with the hard understanding of morale. Broken formations are reconstituted where possible. Generals who cannot keep their men in hand or who hesitate at critical moments are replaced. Command posts pull back, then stop, then pull back again. Railheads are shifted. Bridges are calculated at the speed of retreat, which to hold, which to prepare for demolition, which to abandon. And with every step, the sense grows that this backward motion cannot continue forever. A place must be found to stand. For the Germans, the First Army under von Kluck and the Second under von Bülow, the chase is a grinding, energy-draining endeavor. Their own men stumble, their supplies stretch thin, their horses sink to their knees in the dust. Food arrives late. Ammunition drops arrive where units have already moved. Messages take longer to cross the expanding expanse between advance guards and headquarters. Even victory has a weight, and that weight is borne in bodies, wheels, and hooves. Still, the German right wing pushes on, its spearheads feeling for weak places and finding, instead, stubborn screens. Intersecting streams of information, some accurate, some fragmentary, reach German headquarters in Luxembourg and the mobile corps level staffs in the field. Reports of British positions are a day old by the time they are read. Cavalry screens at eyes but cannot see everything. Maps are drawn with confidence that is sometimes undeserved. There's a sense, both sides feel it, that the retreat is drawing not to a general collapse, but toward a point of decision. French planning, under Joffre's steady hand, bends itself to shaping that point. Units are shifted dramatically by rail. New formations are formed by scraping the armies in Alsace and Lorraine for reserves. Paris is reinforced. Fresh commanders take over at critical junctures. The old confidence of August demonstrations has turned into the sober confidence of staffs working against clocks and distances. The BEF soldiers learn a grim calculus of sleep, march, and fight. Packs are lightened. Rifles are cleaned when time allows. The humor of peacetime quips is rare now. Instead, there is the humor of the trench, dry, fatalistic, muttered within the lines and rarely heard beyond them. Officers write hurried notes home when they can. Chaplains work their rounds. Medics triage with calm efficiency at roadside stations that never quite seem far enough from the guns. The retreat leaves its mark on the land as well as the men. Burned farms, abandoned bicycles, fields of grain flattened by troops sleeping for an hour because there's no time to do more. Military policemen direct traffic at crossroads as if conducting orchestras of exhaustion. And every evening, as the light lowers, a few batteries find places to set up a brief concert of steel to remind the pursuers that there is still a price to pay for every mile. Toward the end of the week, the retreat will begin to bend. The sense of falling back without end gives way to the feeling of drawing a bow. The line will stiffen along rivers and canals, and orders will acquire a new tone. The geography will begin to favor those who know it well, the French, and those who learn it quickly, the British. The great question that hangs over Week 5, where to stand and how, will enter its final phase. The answer will be shaped by a counterstroke at a town by a river, and by decisions taken in a city that believes it can still decide its fate. Part 6. Guys and the French counterstroke. On the Oise River near the town of Guise, the 5th week delivers a jolt. The French Fifth Army, under General Charles Lannerzac, turns and strikes. After days of retreat, this pivot feels like a sudden intake of breath. It is August 29th. The plan is not grandiose. It is purposeful. Attack the German Second Army under von Bülow. Hit it hard enough to relieve pressure on the British beside us, and buy space and time for the larger maneuver Joffre is beginning to imagine. French guns announce the intention. Infantry surge across the Oise in force, taking and retaking villages whose names will be etched on 1,000 regimental colors. The German response is immediate and fierce. Their artillery answers. Their infantry counterattacks. The fighting surges and ebbs along riverbanks and in fields where hedges and copses offer brief shelter and sudden death. For those on the ground, the battle is experienced in seconds and yards, strips of orchard, brick walls, doorways, culverts. Officers with maps in their hands look up as if searching for the rest of their plan in the clouds. Runners carry messages, hunched low, the soles of their boots already worn thin. The French show an energy that surprises German commanders, conditioned by the week's steady withdrawal. The result is measured not in tidy maps, but in bodies and prisoners, in ground taken and lost twice in an hour. Lannerzac's men do not aim to hold Guys indefinitely. They aim to shock, to puncture momentum, to force an adversary to spend strength on arresting a threat instead of on pursuit. They succeed. Von Bülow's army recoils, then braces. Bridges become critical. Sappers work under fire. The Oise, quiet a day before, runs red in places where the mud is churned with the motion of men and the fall of sudden shot. Joffre watches the reports and sees in them the outline of a possibility he has been stitching together. This counterstroke is not isolated. It is part of a pattern of resistance and planned action. Already, in his mind and now in orders, he is reshaping the French northern wing, drawing in units from the east by rail to create a new army outside Paris, a force that will hold the key ground for a maneuver around the enemy's flank. He acts with a cold clarity that has offended subordinates who prefer the old plans and old places. Generals who do not match his tempo are dismissed. Others, sharper and more flexible, take their place. Lanrezac himself will not long survive in his post. His caution, understandable, even justified in places, has angered a commander-in-chief who demands energy. Within days he will be replaced by Franchet d'Espery, a man who, in the coming struggle, will bring the kind of nerve and coordination the situation demands. But at Guise, Lanrezac's army does what it must. It hits and lives to move. The effect of Guise reaches beyond the Oise. It slows the German advance, forces adjustments, and, most importantly, frees the British to continue their retreat in better order. Coordination between the BEF and French armies improves under the crucible of movement. Misunderstandings happen still. They are inevitable given the conditions. But the sense of fighting separate wars on the same map begins to erode. On the German side, confusion creeps in at the edges of confidence. Von Bülow must contend with a sudden blow that interrupts the cadence of advance. Von Kluck on his right must keep moving, his map wide and ambitions wider, but his flank grows longer and thinner as it stretches past Paris on a path few had explicitly planned. The hinge on which the German right swings is not as strong as it looks. Speed has costs. Every kilometer carried forward adds tension to the guiding scheme. News from the east now flows into German headquarters like a tide with two tones. Triumph from Tannenberg, and grim reports from Galicia, where Austria-Hungary is buckling under Russian blows. The need to shore up an ally while pushing for a decision in the west fights for attention in Malka's mind. He detaches units, at least on paper, to help in the east. He issues guidance to his western armies that reflects urgency, but not always clarity. Guise, in this compressed context, stands as the opening note of a longer sequence. It signals that the French are not merely running. They are maneuvering. It says that the enemy you chase today may be the enemy on your flank tomorrow. And it stiffens the sinews of a plan that will require Paris not to be a prize, but a pivot. Part 7. Paris hold its breath. Paris is not a city designed to panic. It has seen too much to be easily impressed by the movements of history. The boulevards, the bridges, the monuments, they belong to an older rhythm. Yet in the 5th week of the war, the city feels the front drawing near like a weather change. The cafes do not empty. The markets do not close. But there is an awareness now that the war is no longer distant. On August 26th, General Joseph Gallieni takes command as military governor of Paris. He is a veteran with a keen eye, brusque and practical, a man whose mind leaps from idea to implementation with little space left for dithering. He takes inventory. The ring of forts that gird the city, the troops available to man them, the internal lines that can move men across Paris by rail and road. He finds a city that can be turned into a fortress if necessary, and a springboard if possible. Gallieni orders trenches dug in the green spaces, barbed wire rolled out across approaches, guns placed where they can bear. He organizes transport and prepares the administrative minds of the city for siege conditions. Messages move, schedules are drafted, and warehouses are catalogued. Police and municipal workers carry out tasks with a bracing mix of resolve and reluctance. The army comes closer. The city's government, calculating prudence and politics, makes its own move. On September 2nd, the French government leaves for Bordeaux. Trains carry the apparatus of State South. Ministers, clerks, files, seals, and ceremony packed into carriages that rattle away from the capital's great stations. The decision lands on Paris like a weight. Some will call it wise. Others will call it abandonment. Gallieni, left in charge of a city that must now not simply endure but help win, tightens his jaw and his plans. The people react with a full spectrum of a great city. Some stock up on essentials. Others volunteer for duties at stations and hospitals. Artists pack canvases. Shopkeepers shudder with care. Posters go up. Rumors circulate. Newspapers write headlines that try to summon calm. Paris has a long memory. It remembers sieges. It remembers occupation. It chooses its response in 1,000 small decisions by ordinary citizens who will make the extraordinary feel ordinary until it is safe to call it extraordinary again. Meanwhile, Joffre's reorganization gathers strength. Units from the eastern frontiers, pulled like threads from a tapestry, arrive by rail around Paris. A new French army forms, the 6th, under General Monnery. It is an instrument designed for a purpose still cloaked in general orders, but already alive in the minds of a few. The purpose is to strike the right flank of the German First Army if the opportunity presents. To create that opportunity, the Germans must pass east of Paris, not west. Gallieni watches for signs that this path, this audacious swing, has been chosen for him. The German First Army, in the pursuit of a decisive envelopment, wheels right. In doing so, it moves across the face of Paris rather than around it, turning a great arc into a narrowing spiral. It is a decision born of momentum, information gaps, and the psychology of commanders who feel the prize within reach and dare not lose sight of it. The army's maps show a British force withdrawing, a French army on the back foot, and a city that is not their primary concern. Yet that city and its commander are watching. Paris becomes more than a symbol in these days. It becomes an operational actor, a node of rail lines and roads that can shift troops with energy and discretion. It becomes a headquarters that can coordinate a sudden blow. Gallieni, who values time as the coin of victory, weighs minutes and hours. If and when the enemy's flank presents itself, he intends to take those minutes and spend them without hesitation. Within the city, life continues with a stiffness that is not quite normal and not quite abnormal either. The Seine flows past embankments where couples still walk, but the talk is different now. In hospitals, wards fill with wounded from the retreat. In churches, candles burn. On rooftops, watchers scan the horizon. If Paris is afraid, it hides it well. If Paris is angry, it channels the anger into work. The city's self-image is its armor. That armor will be tested soon. Part 8. The Wheel to the East and the Coming Marne. As the 5th week narrows to its end, the geometry of the Western Front changes in ways that cannot be seen from any single ditch, but are plain on a large map. Von Kluck's First Army, seeking to envelop, continues its great wheel, now curving east and southeast of Paris rather than maintaining a wide path to its west. The pivot seems elegant on paper. In the fields and lanes, it stretches lines, frays tempers, and opens the possibility the French have been preparing to exploit. Behind the German spearheads, the machinery of supply strains. Wagons queue at bridges. Horse teams stumble. Rails lie too far behind to carry shells to batteries as fast as batteries now fire them. Staff officers wrestle with the math of days on the march, comparing tonnage to distances and removing non-essentials that felt essential a week earlier. The First Army, still powerful, is also tired and, for the first time, exposed on a flank that begins to matter more with each marching hour. Moltke, at his headquarters, feels conflicting pressures. The victory at Tannenberg sparkles on the eastern horizon, but news from Galicia is grim. Austria-Hungary, the ally whose survival is a pillar of strategy, is reeling. Lemberg has fallen to the Russians. The South needs help. He detaches formations from his western front, a decision that will be debated for a century, to shore up the collapsing partner and to secure the eastern narrative against the risk of reversal. In doing so, he removes weight from the blow his right wing is trying to deliver in France. Joffre, reading these same days through the lens of his own intelligence and instinct, sharpens his counterstroke. He names commanders who can act decisively. He issues instructions that move beyond retreat and into maneuver. The British, under Sir John French, receive these messages with a soldier's skepticism and a statesman's caution, but the logic gathers. After days of marching south, the BF will soon be asked to turn, left, not right, to pivot from withdrawal to attack. It is a request that demands trust that has sometimes been stretched thin in this first month of coalition war. In the air, a new dimension of war. Scouts report columns, bridges, and dust. The information is crude but invaluable. Observers in canvas and wire biplanes look down at rivers that gleam and roads that bloom with movement. Their sketches and hurried notes, dropped in weighted bags to waiting staffs, become lines on maps that feed into decisions with hours, not days, to spare. This aerial thread weaves through week 5 like the faint hum of engines barely audible from the ground. Civilians remain the war's witnesses and its victims. The road south from Belgium is thick with refugees. Stories of atrocities, some true, some magnified, run down the roads with them. The sacking of Louvain, the burning of its great library, is still fresh and hot in European minds. In Britain, newspapers roar. In Germany, explanations collide with pride and rage. The war of words grows as fast as the war of shells, and both will shape how the future remembers this month. Recruiting surges. In Britain, men line up under the gaze of Kitchener's pointing finger. New battalions begin to form, not for today's battle, but for the long grind few yet dare to name aloud. In France, conscripts report and march. In Germany, reserve formations join the columns on roads that seem already too full. In Russia, the call continues to reach deep into the countryside that has always been the empire's inexhaustible storehouse of men and horses. As week 5 passes into week 6, the pieces are in motion for a battle that will grant a reprieve and invent a stalemate. The Marne is not yet a battlefield. It is still a line on a map and a quiet river with chalky banks and villages that do not know how soon their names will be made famous by necessity. But the conditions for its transformation are present now. One army is overextended, fast and thin. Another has gathered itself and found the nerve to strike. The city between them stands, not as a prize, but as a source of strength. A government has decamped, but the will to fight has not. In a few days, Paris will send taxis to carry men to the front, not for effect, but for speed. In a few days, Gallieni will watch for the moment to pounce. In a few days, Joffre will issue orders that will require discipline and bravery to execute, and the British will draw breath and turn to the fight again. The Battle of the Marne will be born not from a single decision, but from the accumulation of choices made in this 5th week. The sting at sea, the victory in East Prussia, the stand at Guise, the reorganization of armies, the movement of governments, the endurance of citizens. The cameras of a future century will return to these days again and again, replaying the dust of roads, the silhouettes of marching men, and the lines on maps that curved and then bent back. They will find in week 5 the hinge of a door that swung open just wide enough to let possibility in. Through that opening, in the days ahead, will come a pivot that arrests a rush, saves a city, and condemns the belligerents to a long war of trenches and wire. The easy victory that seemed so close in August will fade like heat haze. Reality, the long, iron reality of modern war, will settle across the fields. The 5th week ends with the sound of boots on roads, the hiss of steam at stations, the low growl of artillery in the distance, and the murmur of a city settling itself to be strong. The next week will test that strength. The names are almost ready to be written. Orc, Grand Morin, Petit Morin, the Marne itself. But before they become legend, they are simply places on a September map, waiting. Part 9, Galicia, Lemberg Falls. In Galicia, week 5 writes a very different ledger. The land here is broad and rolling, a patchwork of fields and marshy streams, the roads long and thin, the distances deceptive. The Austro-Hungarian armies, urged forward by a high command determined to strike before Russian mobilization hardens, step across the frontier into a campaign that will test not only plans and courage, but the tensile strength of an empire built from many peoples speaking many tongues. In these days, Galicia becomes the counterpoint to East Prussia's swift, sharp drama, a slower, larger, grinding collision where early success turns, almost imperceptibly, into a general crisis. At first, the dual monarchy's banner gathers wind. In the north, fighting around Krasnik and Komarov brings Austrian victories measured in prisoners and ground retaken. Columns in blue-gray and field green move with determination. Bugles sound. Staff officers pencil triumphant notes. But on the southern half of the front, Russian forces surge with their own weight and purpose, pressing hard along the line of the Nila Lipa. Here the Russian advance, led by commanders comfortable with wide fronts and opportunistic thrusts, begins to bite deep. Towns change hands, ridges become killing grounds. Austro-Hungarian units, stretched and short of shells, are forced to give way. The character of the Habsburg army shapes every hour. Its regiments are mosaics, Czech, Polish, Ukrainian, Hungarian, Croatian, German, held together by tradition, discipline, and shared sense of duty, yet vulnerable when communications fray and orders turn muddy in translation. Officers work furiously to keep cohesion under the strain of retreat. Some formations perform with remarkable toughness, counterattacking with bayonet and shrapnel at dusk. Others, battered by artillery and shaken by rumors of breakthroughs on their flanks, fall back in uneven steps. The beauty of the staff plan, arrows drawn with confidence, meets the ugliness of roads clogged with wagons, field kitchens, and wounded. Russian commanders, reading the breaks in the line, press. They are not the unstoppable steamroller of legend. Their logistics creak, their rifles misfire, the maps sometimes lie. But they are numerous, their artillery ample, and their momentum building. They push beyond the first ridge and the second, probing toward the city that anchors this sector's identity and rail network, Lemberg. Every mile forward tightens the vice on an opponent whose supply lines grow more precarious, whose reserves are either too far back or already committed. In late August and the first days of September, the struggle becomes a contest of endurance measured in shells expended, bridges held, and valleys crossed. The Russians win the race to reposition. On the outer arcs, the Austro-Hungarian Third Army, fixed and flanked, finds itself under mounting pressure that no local counterblow can relieve. Signals from corps to army carry gloom. Ammunition shortfalls, dwindling rations, units down by half. The music of battle changes. Less the crack of rifle lines, and more the rolling thunder of heavy guns, the staccato of retreat orderlies, trying to impose method on necessity. Lemberg itself is not a fortress of moats and bastions. It is a hub, depots, sidings, depots again, warehouses stacked with food, boots, munitions, offices where clerks who thought themselves far from war now stamp requisitions in rooms that tremble with distant detonations. As the Russian advance closes, the decision hardens. Hold and risk encirclement, or yield the city to preserve the fighting core of the army. The choice is brutal but rational. To save the force is to save the campaign, if only for another day. On September 3rd, Russian columns enter Lemberg. The fall of the city reverberates across chanceries and headquarters. It is a gain recorded not only in maps, but in captured material, in trainloads of prisoners, in the morale surge that comes when a capital of a province changes hands. For Austria-Hungary, the loss is double-edged, material and symbolic. The Empire's soldiers are not broken, but their line is bent deep. The Carpathians beckon as a new defensive line. The pass is a future theater of bitter winter, fighting none yet welcome. Behind the front, hospitals overflow. In Vienna, measured words struggle to conceal alarm. The shock in Galicia ripples outward. In Berlin, the German High Command reads the reports with growing concern. A victory in East Prussia cannot erase the danger to an ally whose collapse would redraw the strategic map. Requests for help become demands. Decisions are made to dispatch units eastward, choices that subtract weight from the hammer blow being swung in France and add it to the shield that must now be raised in the east. Week 5 thus forges a chain linking Lemberg's fall to the subtle loosening of the German right wing's fist on the outskirts of Paris. On the ground in Galicia, the fighting does not stop with the city's capture. It swells and shifts, setting the stage for further battles that will take their names from towns and rivers, Rawa Ruska, the San, until the front finds a new balance. But the key fact is already carved. The Russians have taken Lemberg, and with it the initiative in the theater. The Austro-Hungarian army will rally and fight on, dogged and gallant, yet it does so now in the knowledge that the first great test of the war in the east has cut deep. The war's 5th week ends here with a warning written in the dust of a receding column and the smoke of a rail yard set alight. No plan survives unbloodied. No empire is spared the reckoning of modern war. Part 10. Orders that turn armies. The power of a sentence on paper can bend the direction of thousands of lives. In the last days of Week 5, orders, drafted at midnight, carried by courier, tapped over wires, read by lantern light, begin to turn armies in France from retreat to attack. The change does not come with a drum roll. It arrives like a steadying hand on a shoulder, a new firmness in a commander's voice, a sense that the long bow of withdrawal has been drawn as far as it can go and must now be loosed. The signs have been gathering. In Paris, Gallieni reads the dust clouds on the horizon and the direction of German traffic and senses opportunity. The First Army under von Kluck, intent on enveloping the Allied left, has swung past Paris to the east rather than steering wide to the west. That wheel, elegant on a map, exposes a flank to a city that is not merely a symbol, but an armed camp with rail lines feeding a new French force, Monnery's Sixth Army, being assembled with every train that hisses into stations north of the Seine. Gallieni's instincts are aggressive. He sharpens contingency plans and waits for the moment when the tactical picture will justify an operational strike. At Grand Headquarters, Joffre works with the same materials, but at different tempo. He has spent the week replacing commanders who cannot match the pace, realigning armies, and building an instrument of counterattack across his front. On his right, Castel now crouches on the Nancy Heights. In the center, a new Ninth Army under Foch is forming along the St. Gond marshes near Cézanne, a clever placing, where soft ground can blunt a blow and the artillery he loves can speak from firm positions. On the left, Monnery gathers. Between them stretches the British Expeditionary Force, its men exhausted but steady, its commander, Sir John French, weary after days of hard marching and hard news. Trust across an alliance is a currency in short supply at the end of a long retreat. It is refreshed now by two things. First, by action. Rearguard stands like Nary, where a single British gun held a line at dawn against the shock of a surprise attack, have become parables told in canteens and staff cars alike, proof of a spirit that refuses collapse. Second, by insistence. Senior voices in London have made clear that the BF will not be allowed to fall away from the French line, however grim the calculus of exhaustion. The result is a grudging convergence. Liaison officers move like blood through arteries, carrying clarity where rumor once flowed. On September 4th, the clarity becomes command. Joffre issues instructions that make the pivot explicit. The armies will cease retreating and, beginning in 2 days, attack. The Sixth Army will strike toward the Ourcq against the German right. The British will pivot left and drive at the exposed flank of the great wheel curving past them. Foch's Ninth Army will hold and counterpunch along the marshes. Further east, French formations will press where they can to fix German forces in place. It is a design that requires timing, nerve, and luck. It also requires a reading of the enemy's mind that is, for once, close to the truth. Von Kluck's speed has bought him distance. It has also opened a seam between his First Army and von Bülow's Second that cannot be closed without a pause he can no longer afford. The German staff feels unease, but its eyes are fixed ahead. Logistics groan. Horses foam. Men sleep in ditches when they can and march when they cannot. Yet their commanders, convinced the British are broken and the French finished, press on. The decision to detach formations to the eastern front compounds the risk. The strike is powerful, but the arm that swings it is not as heavily muscled as it was a week before. Aerial scouts report more Allied movement than expected near Paris. Cavalry screens send back glimpses that do not quite fit the narrative of a collapsing enemy. Doubt grows in the shadows of confident dispatches. In Paris, Gallieni sees enough. He will later be immortalized for taxis, but his real genius in these hours is tempo. When the opening appears, he intends to spend minutes like coins. Units are alerted. Bridges are tested. Roads are cleared. Trains roll at night, their windows blacked, the soldiers inside dozing with rifles across their knees. The city that held its breath now exhales in work, loading, marching, planning, so that when the hour arrives, there will be no delay between decision and contact. Evening on September 5th descends on a front that is, in essence, already changing direction. Orders reach brigade tables lit by guttering candles. Officers trace routes on maps stained by rain and sweat. Men eat, clean their rifles, and try to sleep knowing that tomorrow's march will not end with another backward step, but with a turn to face the pursuit. The sound of guns never truly stops. It rises and falls like surf. But for the first time since the frontier battles, the guns will soon speak in support of an advance that aims not to buy time, but to seize it. The moment before the blow is a fragile thing. It is made of faith. Faith that the ally will do what he says. Faith that the enemy has overreached. Faith that men who have carried their packs 100 miles can carry them one more day, and then fight. It is also made of calculation, angles, bridges, timetables, the geometry of rivers with names not yet legendary. Orc, Grand Morin, Petit Morin, and then, at last, the Marne. Week 5 ends with those names, still just lines on a map, and with orders in the hands of couriers running through the dark. By the time the sun lifts again, the hinge of the campaign will begin to turn, and with it, the fate of the city behind the lines, and the shape of a war that will now stretch far beyond anyone's first imaginings. Thank you for walking beside us through the dust, the doubts, and the sudden turns of a war that remade the world. Your time and attention give weight to these stories. Names on casualty lists become human again, places on maps regain their shape, and choices taken in haste reveal their lasting echoes. If this episode deepened your understanding, we invite you to stay with WW1 Documentaries. Subscribe, share this film with someone who cares about history, and add your voice in the comments. Your reflections guide the work ahead and help others find their way to this story. Ahead lies a new phase. The counterstroke on the Marne has steadied a nation. The Aisne will harden into lines. The first trenches will score the earth from riverbank to ridge. We will be there as carefully as we can, as clearly as we must, following the men and women who live these days without knowing how they would end. Your support, every view, every like, every subscription, keeps this project moving. It preserves space for patience, for context, and for the quiet moments that make sense of the noise. From all of us at WW1 Documentaries, thank you for watching, for remembering, and for returning. We'll meet again next week, one chapter further into the Great War, one step closer to understanding how it became the world we inherited.